The mountain calls again. Those words mean that the Supercars teams are on their way to Bathurst. You may be on the way to Bathurst as well, but regardless of how you plan to watch this year's edition of the Great Race, I am here to tell you everything you need to know before the cars hit the track this Thursday. Welcome to my Round 10 preview here on Fan at the Fence. It is time for the big one. The battleground this weekend is the hallowed Mount Panorama circuit, located about 3 hours west of the Sydney CBD in a beautiful part of Australia up there in the Blue Mountains. It is technically a street circuit, which is easy to forget when you don't have skyscrapers all around, but it is indeed a public road that is turned into the most incredible racetrack at this time of year. A lap around this joint is 6.2 kilometers in length or 3.8 miles, featuring 23 grueling corners in an anti-clockwise direction, and the risk rating, I'm sure you already know, is absolutely extreme, especially over the top of the hill. The lap begins with a reasonably short run into the first turn, known as Hell Corner, a near 90-degree left-hander that feeds you onto the roller coaster ride of Mountain Straight. That will spit you out at turn 2, a right-hander known as Griffin's Bend, and this is where the climb really starts to begin. After that, the walls start to tighten as you get into the cutting, followed by a few right-handed kinks as you get up to Reed Park under the tree, often with a big slide, and then you plunge through Suleiman Park, over the grate and up to the famous McPhillamy Park. This is that iconic shot, the corner right above that famous Mount Panorama sign on the side of the hill, and then you've got nothing but horizon as you cross over Brock Skyline, down through the S's, followed by the Dipper just to tighten things up even further. Navigate through a few treacherous bends in the road, just ask Chaz Mostert, and then you'll find yourself at Forest Elbow as you set yourself up for the famous Conrod Straight. After taking a breather through there, you are holding on for dear life as you go through the chase, one of the prime areas of the track for both mistakes and overtakes. And if you survive all that, you get down to Murray's Corner, and that completes a lap of this insane racetrack. If you've been following my round previews throughout the season, you'll know that I like to throw out a few spots to watch if you're new to Supercars around a particular track. When it comes to Mount Panorama though, you can put an exclamation mark on pretty much the whole place. There is not a meter of tarmac that hasn't seen drama here, but in the interest of being more specific, I think there's a few spots that could be extra interesting with the new Gen 3 cars. The first one is the cutting. I've already mentioned how tight this area is of the racetrack, but with the much lower downforce levels on Gen 3, we could see the rear end stepping out a lot more through here, causing some accidents. Same applies for my next spot to watch, which is an entire section of racetrack from Reed to McPhillamy Park. This whole area should be a lot looser. With the Gen 2 cars that we've had over recent years, they had a lot of downforce that behaved a lot more like GT3s over the top. These things, the Gen 3 machines, they should behave a lot more like touring cars. Mark Winterbottom predicted some accidents up here, some big accidents in fact, with Gen 3 on a V8 Sleuth podcast earlier in the year, and based on how the cars have behaved at other high-speed sections on the calendar, I think he's on the money there. Time will tell. After that, my final spot to watch is the chase. Once again, this has been pretty easy flat over recent years, but with the new Gen 3s, it should be a lift at the very least. And certainly if you're side by side, it's going to be a white knuckle ride. So plenty to keep your eye on around the mountain this weekend. Supercars' last visit to the mountain in 2022 can be summed up with one word: rain. And I can tell you that because I was there, and I still think I'm drying out a year later. It was horrendous weather, but I tell you what, props to the fans. They didn't let it impact their time. They had an awesome atmosphere going. It was amazing to be a part of. Thursday was actually fairly decent for the first practice sessions, but the weather really came in from Friday. I was up there at McPhillamy Park in the clouds watching that quali session take place. It really jumbled up the grid due to the conditions. The shootout though, which is one of my favourite parts of Bathurst, was cancelled on the Saturday due to the torrential rain. The race, however, the weather began to clear. The most important part of the weekend, the weather god shined down on us. It started to dry up, but there was plenty of mud and standing water around the place that led to some big incidents, some spins up Mountain Straight on the first lap, and a big shunt on the exit of the chase as well, which took out multiple contenders. Ultimately, it came down to a pressure race between Shane van Gisbergen with Mostert chasing him for the win, SVG holding strong and taking a second win around Mount Panorama. Let's turn our attention to 2023 though. As I flagged at the top of the show, Supercars will hit the track on Thursday with 2 practice sessions, the latter of which is dedicated just to the co-drivers. Things get more serious on the Friday with 2 more practice sessions, followed by qualifying at 4:15 PM local. Saturday, 2 more practice sessions, and then of course the iconic top 10 shootout at 5:05 PM. And then Sunday we have the warm up in the morning, hopefully a clean one for everybody before the race. 161 laps getting underway at 11:15 AM. All times here are in Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Don't let that recent daylight saving switch catch you out with the time zones. If you're heading trackside, you'll be pleased to know that the weather this year is looking a lot better. We're expecting partly cloudy conditions across all 4 days, a little bit on the cool side where max is around the 20-degree mark, but yeah, certainly a whole lot better. That said, I am recording this quite early in the week, and it is of course the Blue Mountains, so keep your eye on the updated forecast as the days draw on. As for the key championship headlines, since the last event at Sandown, we have a confirmed date for Supercars' return to New Zealand in 2024. GEN3 will be racing around Taupo between April 19 to 21. The biggest news is perhaps Tim Edwards, team principal and CEO of Tickford. He has announced he will be leaving the team at the end of this year. Lots of speculation on where he might be headed long term, but for the near future it sounds like he's just keen for a bit of a break from the sport. The New South Wales government has thrown its support behind the Newcastle 500, which should open next year's season. However, that is subject to approval by the local council. Simona Di Silvestro is back at Bathurst for the first time since the pandemic, and DJR have unveiled a striking yellow shell livery for that car. Speaking of liveries, Red Bull have re-signed with AAA to keep their livery on those machines for a few more years, and Supercars have launched a brand new website and app. I haven't had the chance to try the app yet. I've had a little poke around the website and it looks like a good step up, so be sure to check those out if you haven't already. Supercars have announced a partnership with Xbox ahead of this year's Greats Race that will see Xbox and Forza Motorsport sponsorship around the track, as well as some driver ambassadors in Brody Kostecki and Andre Heimgartner. I must admit this one's a bit strange because Forza Motorsport, the next one, is releasing just a few days after the event, but as I understand it doesn't feature Bathurst or the Gen3 Supercars at launch, so for me it's a bit frustrating and only highlights that are missing content in the new game at launch, but fingers crossed it's a sign it's coming in the future. And finally, the crowds at Mount Panorama this weekend are expected to be some of the biggest in the event's history, obviously celebrating the 60th anniversary, the introduction of Gen3 at the mountain, and it sounds like people are beginning there nice and early, over a week before the event, to set up their campsites. Let's get into Gen3 Watch because the cars have continued to develop since the last event in Melbourne. Starting off with some new wheel nuts, there is a new specification after the wheels literally fell off some of the cars at Sandown, so fingers crossed that problem has been rectified. Supercars have also reverted to the drop gear from previous Bathurst 1000s for this year's event. They were set to run a higher drop gear that may have helped with reliability and potentially hitting 300 k's down Conrod, but it sounds like there were some supply issues, so they've reverted back. However, it sounds like the teams may have managed to source everything, so we'll see if that changes throughout the weekend. On the parity front, the danger zone, there are lighter body panels confirmed for the Mustang, which will change its center of gravity. And just to make things extra interesting, it sounds like Ford are lobbying Supercars to approve some further aerodynamic changes that they have manufactured and ready to go. GM have obviously flagged some concerns with that ahead of this year's Great Race, so we've got the two big brands going head to head in the political sphere. It could get quite emotional and eventful depending how all that unfolds. But what if you are a neutral and watching the race for the first time? Well, let me give you some storylines, some interesting facts about some of the different teams and drivers up and down the grid. Let's start with Brad Jones Racing. They run 4 cars in the championship, but they have never won Bathurst despite their extensive history. If they're going to do it this year, you've got to think that Bryce Forward or Andre Heimgartner would be their leading contenders with their co-drivers. But yeah, regardless of who does it, it would be amazing for this team to finally do it. Cameron Waters and James Moffat in the monster car have come so close to winning Bathurst on multiple occasions, but have not pulled it off just yet. Will Brown and Jack Perkins haven't won Bathurst either, and Perkins would be a special story because Jack is the son of the famous Larry Perkins, so that would be a great piece of history as well. Will and Alex Davidson partner up again in one of the Shell cars, and these would be the first siblings to win Bathurst together if they pull it off. Matt Payne and Kevin Estre were a surprise package in Sandown, with Matt Payne being a relatively young charger early on in his career, and Kevin Estre making his Supercars debut last time out but doing an amazing job. So these two will be an interesting combination to watch. Shane Van Gisbergen might be the reason why you're tuning into Bathurst for the first time after his amazing NASCAR debut earlier this year. This could be his last Bathurst for the foreseeable future as he heads stateside. Meanwhile, his co-pilot Richie Stanaway is rebounding his Supercars career. After a few years away, he made his Bathurst return last year and now has a full-time drive secured for next year, so it'll be interesting to see how he performs at the mountain. Simona Di Silvestre is back for the first time since the pandemic, partnering up with Kai Allen. She is the only female on this year's grid. And Craig Lowndes partners with Zane Goddard. And Goddard had a really rough end and a really rough time following last year's race, where he made a big mistake, caught up a few cars returning to the racetrack down at the Chase. He got hit pretty hard, but he's back. They did a great job at Sandown, so fingers crossed they put in another strong performance at the mountain. Alright, let's start wrapping things up with some predictions, starting with my own, and as always, don't take these too seriously. They're just a bit of fun that I do here on my round previews, and if you've been following my strike rate so far this season, you know I am rarely on the money. But my first prediction is that the winner of this year's great race will not be from Red Bull or Erebus. That's right, I'm predicting someone outside of the championship contenders will take the flag. My second prediction is that the mandatory brake change will take one of the leading cars out of contention. So if you haven't been following it, this year the teams are not just required to change the pads, they're changing the whole caliper with these new Gen 3 machines, and this creates a whole bunch of risks and headaches to the point where the teams try to avoid it altogether in Sandown, but they will be forced to make this change at the mountain. And with all the nervousness around that, it could all go wrong for one of the leading cars. And my final prediction isn't a good one, but I'm predicting we might get our first Gen 3 rollover at the mountain. Obviously the cars are a lot looser going through the Chase. That gravel is notorious for flipping cars over, so we'll see how that one falls. I think the last time I predicted a rollover was in Perth because of the density of the sand around our track here, but yeah, we'll see if anything goes down at the mountain. As always, I put the call up for some predictions from you guys, and a big thank you to everyone for sharing your thoughts. The first one here from Spencer saying that Jamie Whincup will break his Bathurst curse and win alongside Brock Feeney. Now, the word curse here is an interesting one because Whincup has had amazing success at Bathurst. He's had some pretty spectacular failures as well, but he hasn't stood on the podium for 10 years at the mountain, which I think is what the curse is referring to here. And you've got to say, with the way Brock Feeney's performing, with the way Whincup performed at Sandown, they've got to be on track to break that curse and yeah, potentially take the win, as Spencer is predicting here. Our second prediction is from Sam, who thinks that Ford will take the win with Reynolds and Tander on the top step of the podium. Those guys were one of the strongest looking Ford contenders before the wheels literally fell off their race at Sandown. Be really interesting to see how they go at the mountain, especially if there is a further parity adjustment in the aero department. He's also predicted that Moster and Holdsworth will take second and Finney and Whincup in third. And then our final prediction is more about the specification of the cars and the racing this weekend. We've got Adam predicting a safety car for the dangerous amount of marbles at the Great due to the soft tyre being used. Now, this is an interesting point because we are using the soft tyre instead of the hard tyre at Bathurst for the first time potentially in history, or certainly as long as I can remember, and we saw loads of marbles building up at Sandown. So given that Bathurst is twice the length, arguably a lot higher strain on the tyres as well over the top, we'll see how many marbles build up. It could potentially lead to some incidents late in the race, and while I'd be surprised to see a safety car solely for the purpose of clearing up marbles or that discarded rubber on the track, it wouldn't surprise me if they did try to clean the circuit up a bit during safety car periods for other incidents. Let's not forget, despite the gravity of this event, that there is a championship going on in the background with 4 drivers in close contention. Brody Kostecki leads the way over Shane Van Gisbergen, who's 155 points behind. Brock Feeney is in third, Will Brown in fourth, and it'll be interesting to see how those championship contenders approach this weekend. Success could mean winning Bathurst during their championship season. failure could mean losing the whole thing. It'll be really interesting to see how it all unfolds. Of course, then you've got some that aren't in the championship but will have some pace. Andre Heimgartner, Chaz Mostert, Cameron Waters, Jack LeBrock, Will Davidson, and Bryce Forward just creeping into the top 10 as well. We'll see how it all goes down. On the team's front, Erebus continues to lead the way over Red Bull, who keep closing up in second. Brad Jones in third. Shell V-Power have finally started climbing that ladder in fourth, and Tickford in fifth. And of course, just to keep the action flowing, we've got some great support categories with sports sedans and some amazing variety in their ranks. We've got the V8 Super Utes, Toyota Gazoo Racing 86s, Porsche Carrera Cup, and of course the Dunlop Series supporting the main event this weekend. Loads of action to keep us entertained. But that will bring my Bathurst preview to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe if you want to come back for my Bathurst review early next week. Keep an eye out for some community posts and polls that I'll put up as it all unfolds on the track. And of course, a big thank you for your support. It was about this time last year that I was sitting atop Mount Panorama thinking of starting a YouTube channel about the championship, and a year later, here we are. Thank you so much for all your support. If you are at the mountain this weekend, I hope you have the most incredible time. Let me know in the comments below if you are there. And of course, I will be there watching on TV from Perth, cheering all the drivers on and hopefully enjoying an exciting race with you guys as well. Bring it on.